Good morning, everyone. Welcome to GCSE English Language Paper 1. That's the 9 to 1 AQA Explorations in Creative Reading and Writing. Question 2 is the one we're going to concentrate on today. Okay, so let's have a look. The most important thing that we need to know is our assessment objectives. So always remember to learn what they are. You need to know what you need to do to get the examiner to give you some marks, basically. And the AO2 skill is the one that we need to focus on here. Explain, comment on, and analyse how writers use language and structure to achieve effects and influence readers using relevant subject terminology to support their views. So what do we mean by maybe a key term that we might need to learn here is the word analyse. So what does that actually mean? It means that when you're going to have a look at language, we're going to take a piece of language and examine something in really great detail in order to get a better understanding of it. And in our case, it's to get a better understanding of the effect that it has on us as readers. So here we have a little note there for you. In the case of question 2, it means to examine how a writer has developed an effect, why a writer has chosen to use particular words, maybe phrases, or techniques such as extended metaphor, similes, figurative language to have an effect on the reader. Most important thing. Okay, so moving on. What does the question look like? So I'm going to use today the question 2, which if you were in my class over at Broadwater or West Durrington, we did the paper 1 November 2018 source that we did our mocks for. So we're going to have a look at that question 2. We're going to do a bit of analysis on that. It was look in detail at this extract, and it will give you the line numbers from line 16 to 26 of the source. So if we remember that paper 1, you don't need to go to the main source to box off the section, because when you're given your question paper, the section is actually boxed off for you. Please make sure that you use the boxed off section on your question paper and you don't go to the source, because it's very easy to start reading outside of the lines that you've been directed to and then end up losing marks. How does the writer use language here? It will never change. How does the writer use language is your question 2, and it will never change. But we have a focus to look at. And in this question, it says, how does the writer use language here to describe the Tyrannosaurus Rex? 8 marks for this question. Make sure you know how many marks each question is worth, how much time. 10 minutes, if you remember. If you go to your yellow books in your folders, you should have plenty of notes that you've done in my class about approaching this question and tips and things. If you have not been in my class or you did not take notes, then you need to start writing some notes so that you really engage with some of these ideas. It will also say, so here we are, I've got 10 minutes, highlight the specific focus of the question. Take your highlighter pen, engage with the text, please. So you should be highlighting the Tyrannosaurus Rex. You could include the writer's choice of, so you always get this scaffolding, and it says words and phrases. So here, what the examiner is looking for is for you to be able to pick out things like nouns, verbs, adjectives, or phrases that include verbs with maybe adverbs, or nouns that have got plenty of adjectives. You have to know what these are. And I say time and time again that if you get to anywhere near taking the exam and you cannot identify these particular word clauses or definitions, if you can't pick them out, if you don't know what they mean, then you need to start doing some work now. Language techniques, when we talk about language techniques, that's things like similes, metaphors, personification, pathetic fallacy, sensory language, anything like that are techniques of language that writers use. and sentence forms. Now, we have talked about sentence forms. It's not enough to just say, oh, the writer has used a short sentence, or the writer has used lots of long sentences, if you can't say for what purpose. So only use the sentence forms if you actually can identify the purpose that they have been used for. We remind ourselves that sometimes a one-word sentence or a very short sentence can suggest that the reader takes a breath, maybe turns, looks, thinks. It could be to create tension. On the other hand, a complex sentence, and you will have to look in the context, might suggest something like a long journey where the writer's feeling really tired, or something going on in the writer's head that's sort of giving them a lot of anxiety. So they're thinking about lots of things on top of one another that's causing them to feel anxious. So really think about why that sentence is so long and why it's being used if you're going to comment on it. But you might also, when you think about sentence forms, you might think about the punctuation, like an exclamation mark for a command maybe, or shock, or maybe a rhetorical question to show the internal thought of a character possibly. So remember that the only time you are going to talk about the sentence forms if you can talk about the way that they affect you as a reader. Okay, let's move on then. So if we have a quick look at the mark scheme, so it's really important, isn't it, to know what you're being marked for. So how can you actually get a particular mark? If we're looking to pass this GCSE and we want a grade 4, we are looking to probably score around half the marks for every single question, apart from question 1, where I would expect you to be getting full marks. So you're looking to get half the marks or above for each question to get a grade 4 or 5. And that's possibly where, if you're at college and doing a resit, you might be aiming for. You might have been in a grade 3, almost at grade 4, just missed it. So we won't look at the really top marks. We'll try and concentrate on how we can get from the 3 to 4 marks, showing some attempt at understanding language, up to the 5 or 6 marks, which will really take us into a nice, secure grade 4. And at 5 to 6 marks, you're showing a clear and relevant understanding of language. So what does that mean? It means that in that 5 to 6 marks, you can explain clearly the effect of language, and you can select a range of relevant details. That's your quotes from the text must be relevant to the effect that you're talking about. And you can make clear and accurate use of subject terminology. That means knowing those nouns, those verbs, those metaphors correctly, and be able to label the language quite clearly. When we're down just before that grade 4 into a grade 3 response, which would score about 3 to 4 marks, it's showing an attempt at understanding language. So it might be that you make a comment on the effect, but you don't really do it in any major detail. So quite often, if you see me or any of your teachers write expand, explain, it means that you've made a comment, but really there's so much more that you could do with the possibly the appropriate textual detail that you've chosen to use in your response, and makes some correct subject terminology. You've got to know it, haven't you? So in order to get a grade 4, we need to do some homework on that. If that's you, and then you want to know what you need to be doing, you could be revising those things. Okay, so we are going to have a look at that November 2018 paper, which used a 20th century piece of prose fiction, Sound of Thunder by Ray Bradbury. And this was an extract from the middle of his short story published in 1952. And these are lines 16 to 26. So I'm going to read those for you now. It came on the great, oiled, resilient, striding legs. It towered 30 feet above half of the trees, a great evil god, folding its delicate watchmaker's claws close to its oily reptilian chest. Each lower leg was a piston, 1,000 pounds of white bone, sunk in thick ropes of muscle, sheathed over in a gleam of pebbled skin like the armour of a terrible warrior. Each thigh was a ton of meat, ivory and steel mesh. And from the great breathing cage of the upper body, those two delicate arms dangled out front, arms with hands which might pick up and examine men like toils, like while the snake neck coiled, and the head itself, a ton of sculptured stone, lifted easily upon the sky. Its mouth gaped, exposing a fence of teeth like daggers. Its eyes rolled, ostrich eggs, empty of all expression save hunger. It closed its mouth in a death grin. It ran, its pelvic bones crushing aside trees and bushes, its talon feet clawing at the earth, leaving prints 6 inches deep wherever it settled its weight. Okay, so there is our source. Let's have a think about what do we need to do now. So that will be the piece of writing or any piece of writing that you get about that long, chosen deliberately because it's got a lot of language features that the writer have used to affect you as a writer. So top tips, so some preparation before writing. So it's a 10-minute response. So you might spend 5 minutes doing this. You have to do some preparation. Do not just start writing your response. Number 1, with your highlighter, highlight the focus of the question. Make sure it's there so that everything you write, you can check, have a look at that highlighted focus, and you know that you are looking for language to describe the T-Rex. Number 2, read each sentence carefully from full stop to full stop to make sure you have a clear understanding of what the writer is revealing to you as a reader. Okay, quite often, and I see this quite a lot, when students actually misread the text, it's because they've only read up to a comma or a semicolon and not read the entire sentence. So just to remind you again, a sentence has one complete idea. So it's really important that you read from full stop to full stop. Number 3, while you are reading and you know the focus of your question, with your highlighter, highlight any words or phrases that relate to the focus of the question. Anything that stands out to you that will tell you about the T-Rex, that describes something about the way the T-Rex moves or the way it looks or whatever. And then when you've done that, identify the techniques. So put the highlighter pen down, pick up your pen, see if you can identify the techniques used by the writer. Look at single words. Are they verbs? Are they action words? Are they descriptive words? Are they adjectives? Are they groups of words or phrases or extended phrases that could link together to have one particular effect on you as a reader? So it might be, for example, that you have a number of verbs that stand out to you that are highlighted, and you've annotated the text, and you can see 3 or 4 verbs that might go together that suggest maybe something like violence or force or something like that. So really, you can't see that until you've actually done this. So what I think I'd like you to do now is maybe pause this presentation, take your text and have a go at doing that. While you're doing that, really, really have a think. What's the overall effect that you're getting from the writer about this T-Rex? Okay, so you should now have restarted the recording and come back to me, and hopefully you have some of your own notes and you've highlighted your text. So let's just have a look then at what it might look like. Now, you'll notice in my heading here, I've put some of the text highlighted for specific examples of language. You could have chosen a number of other pieces of text. I've just chosen some that I'm going to maybe use some of. So I've in red pen, I've put maybe that it towered 30 feet above half the trees, a great evil god. I've got delicate watchmaker's claws. You'll see I've got a number of other little pieces that I have decided that I want to choose to explain what effect I think the writer wants me to have about the dinosaur. So, can you write down? You might have other things. You might have great oiled, resilient, striding legs, for example. You might have that. You might have its pelvic bones crush aside trees. Don't worry about that. It's all of those things are actually describing the dinosaur, but it's really up to you. So, can you just have a look? Have you got anything that I've got? Can you write down, please, a sentence? What overall effect do you think the writer wants you, the reader, to have about the dinosaur? This is absolutely key, because what you're going to do is you're going to think about the overall effect, and then you're going to use what you have highlighted or the language you've identified to prove the effect. Okay, so I've now got a slide here that shows you that I've annotated my highlighted text. So I've managed to realize that it towered being an action word, so that's a verb. So I'm going to just mark that. It's a great evil god. So it's no longer a dinosaur, but a great evil god. So metaphor, when the writer says something is something else. I've got a couple of adjectives there with delicate watchmaker's claws. I've chosen a simile, pebbled skin, like the armor of a terrible warrior. You'll remember that a simile is a comparison that uses like to compare one thing with another. When you choose this, make sure, when you choose a simile, make sure you don't just have that like the armor of a terrible warrior and focus on that. You've got to know what the comparison is. So in this case, it's that the dinosaur has pebbled skin. So make sure you do identify that. Then I've got some figurative language here. Each thigh was a ton of meat and ivory and steel mesh. And then I've also got there another piece down the side too. If you weren't sure that that might be an extended metaphor, each thigh was steel mesh, then it could be figurative language. I've also chosen arms with hands which might pick up and examine men like toys, another simile. I've chosen offensive teeth like daggers, metaphor. So we've got offensive teeth, so there's our metaphor, but like daggers is a simile. So we've got that one there. Metaphor with the ostrich egg eyes, so it's eyes rolled ostrich eggs, so that gives me a sense of the size of those eyes, empty of all expression save hunger. A bit more figurative language there. So you'll see that I've got a number of things that I can annotate. If you can't think of what the language technique is, either don't use it or think, is it figurative language? Is it sensory language? Is it something else that I could call it when I'm discussing that particular point? So that's what your text should look like, depending on what you've decided you're going to focus in on. Okay. So before we prepare to write an answer, I've just got a couple of hints and tips, if you like, while we're thinking about writing our answer. So before you write, think about the overall effect the piece of writing has had on you as a reader. I think this is the absolute key. If you want to get into a grade 4 and above mark, you've got to think about the overall effect. Do not just take a piece of language and talk about it it's the thing as a whole. So we're going to read the whole thing and then write down that sentence before you start trying to prove it with the language that's being used. And that's really going to get you into a solid grade 4. Remind yourself of the focus of the question, which was how does the writer use language to describe the Tyrannosaurus Rex? Note down in one statement what impression you now have after doing your annotating and your highlighting of the T-Rex. Okay, so what impression do you have? That's the overall effect. And now use the language that you have identified that the writer has deliberately used to give you this impression to prove your statement. Okay, so that's the key in every time you do this question 2 language question. And we're going to try and have a go at a PEED paragraph, if you like. So everybody should know what that is. Number 1, make a point, contextualize. So when the dinosaur is or first appears, it, whatever. So make sure you contextualize, say when. And then include a language technique used by the writer. So the writer uses whatever. Find a quote or your evidence to support your point and embed into your sentences if you can. If not, just put your quote in after that. And then you're into your evaluation, which is your analysis. Yes. Why has the writer used that language? Because it's going to influence you as a reader in a certain way. So analyze carefully how the words, phrases, techniques work to influence you as a reader. So the effect must be clear. Develop your point possibly by zooming in on particular words, or use the extended language features such as extended metaphor if you can. If you can't, don't worry. Some students can use the extended metaphor scenario, or they'll see different pieces of figurative language that they can use. The most important point is to be able to prove the overall effect that the writing has on the reader. Okay, and if you do that just using verbs and adjectives, maybe a simile, then that is fine as long as your answer is clear. Okay, so let's have a look at, have you written yours up? Yeah, so let's just go back for a second. You might just want to take another 5 minutes now and write up your answer before you have a look with me at the student responses. Okay, so I'd like you to have a go at your answer, and then you can compare with our student responses. So try not to cheat here. And if you are on Google Classroom, you might want to send your responses to your teacher for some feedback. Okay, so let's have a look now at student A response. We're going to have a look at 2 students' responses. I want you to read this carefully and then look back at the mark scheme. How many marks would you score this response? So if you go back on the slides, you'll see the mark scheme that we went through. Okay, and I'm just going to read it for you. So the writer uses verbs, adjectives, similes, and metaphors to describe the T-Rex as scary. The use of the verb towered 30 feet above the trees shows how tall the T-Rex is, making me think the dinosaur is quite big and scary. The writer also uses a metaphor to show us that the dinosaur is bad, a great evil god, and a warrior. That makes me think the dinosaur is quite violent, as warriors are usually like soldiers who go to war. Its teeth are a fence of teeth like daggers, suggests that the T-Rex has a lot of teeth which are sharp and dangerous. Okay, so have a look at that mark scheme, write down what you think, make some notes on a piece of paper before we have a look together. And then if we go to the next slide, we'll see that we've got this 3 to 4 marks. So this is kind of like a grade 3. All right, so it's getting into a grade 4, but there's so much more. This could be really much better than this. So I've color coded this. So the attempts to comment on the effect of language are in red. The select some appropriate textual detail in green, and make some use of subject terminology blue. So let's just have a look at that. I've got a couple of things to say. The amount of times that I read in that first sentence, the writer uses verbs, adjectives, similes, and metaphors to describe the T-Rex, or to describe whatever, the house, the setting, the weather. Please don't do that. It has earned you absolutely 0 marks. and you've only got 10 minutes to formulate this answer. You've wasted your time. You're not trying to tell the examiner that you know some language terminology. We need to take one thing at a time. Now, this candidate has said the T-Rex is scary. T-Rex is scary. Now, that maybe is a bit of an effect, an overall effect. So give her a little bit of a tick for that. Or her, I've said her, the student, a bit of a tick. The use of the verb. So here I've got correct subject terminology. Towered 30 feet above the trees. Okay, so I haven't actually got the particular verb, but I'm going to ignore that. There is some appropriate textual detail, and we've got some use of the subject technology, and we've got a comment here. Shows how tall the T-Rex is, making me think the dinosaur is quite big and scary. Okay, not bad, not bad. We could have developed that more. But yes, it does tell me how tall it is. It tells me how big and scary it is. Maybe. All right, yeah. The writer also uses a metaphor. Yep, so we've got another use of subject terminology to show us that the dinosaur is bad. Okay, so there's another effect there. A great evil god, correct use of textual detail, so appropriate, and a warrior, so a bit more textual detail, which has been used appropriately. And here we've got our comment on the effect. That makes me think the dinosaur is quite violent. Good. Well, the warrior would make me think it's violent. I don't know about the evil god. I haven't seen anything about that, as warriors are usually like soldiers who go to war. Okay, that's fine. That's quite good for the warrior, but there's no effect of the language a great evil god. So our student has forgotten that they've used that. And then this student goes on to the next point. Its teeth are offensive teeth like daggers, which suggests that the T-Rex, so, okay, fine. So we haven't got a subject terminology. They haven't said that that is a simile. However, we've got a comment on the effect. Has a lot of teeth which are sharp and dangerous. Okay, daggers, sharp and dangerous. Okay, fine. Not bad. I think that if you take each point and look carefully, could you have possibly written a little more clearly or a little bit more detail about any of those points? And can you understand why that would probably score 3 to 4 marks? It's a good, solid attempt. However, it's not quite good enough to get into, as far as I'm concerned, a grade 4 pass, a safe grade 4 pass. We need to do a little bit more than that. What you could do here is you could just take this student A response, compare it with the response that you've written, or you could take this one and see if you could make this one a little bit better before reading student B's response. So I'll leave that up to you. So if you pause me now and have a go at that, and then come back and we'll have a look at the next slide. So let's have a look at student B then. So, okay, so student B response. So I want you to read carefully and then look back at the mark scheme. How many marks would you score this response? When we first see the Tyrannosaurus Rex, the writer says it towered 30 feet above the trees. The verb towered suggests that the dinosaur is really tall, as if it can see everything beneath it, so nothing can escape its eyes. This makes me feel that the T-Rex is fearsome and scary. The dinosaur is also described as a great evil god. This metaphor makes me feel as if the T-Rex is all-powerful, just like a god, but with the adjective evil reinforcing that it is not a good god, but a wicked one with a bad character that would deliberately harm anything or anyone it wanted with pleasure. The idea of a fearsome creature is continued with the image of a terrible warrior, implying the Tyrannosaurus Rex is a fighter, prepared to use its strength and inflict damage on its enemy. The writer further alerts the reader that the dinosaur is a fighting machine, using a simile to describe its fence of teeth-like daggers. A dagger conjures up the image of a really sharp knife used by a murderer to kill. The fact that this dinosaur has a mouthful of daggers makes me feel afraid that anyone coming into contact with the beast would certainly need to be frightened for their lives. Okay, what do you think? More detail? Right, let's have a look at the annotated response. Oh, get rid of that one. Right, okay, go on to the next one. Okay, so again, I've color-coded this, explains clearly the effects of language is in red, the range of relevant details are in green, and clear and accurate use of subject terminology is in blue. You'll see that I've scored this 5 to 6 marks. So we've got that contextualization when we first see the Tyrannosaurus Rex. Okay, so contextualize, which was in the hints and tips. It towered 30 feet above. Now, there's a little bit of extra information in the original text, and I didn't really think that we needed that in. So this student has taken out those words. And if you take out words from your quote, just put 3 dots, yes, the trees. And then we've got a focus here, the verb. So we've got good and accurate terminology, towered. So we've actually, this student has focused in on a particular word in that phrase that they chose. That's good. The verb tower, what does it suggest? Suggests the dinosaur is really tall, so they're making a good point here, as if it can see everything beneath it, so nothing can escape its eyes. Really good point. And then we've got the effect. This makes me feel that the T-Rex is fearsome and scary. So good, all good at the moment. The next point, dinosaur is also described as a great evil god. So we've got another detail from the text and a correct and clear, accurate subject terminology to this metaphor. Effect, makes me feel. T-Rex is all powerful, just like a god. And then again, that development within that PEED, that development, we've got a zooming in on one particular word within that phrase to further extend our explanation. So we've got here the adjective evil. So again, correct and focuses in using that word, reinforcing that it is not a good God, but a wicked one with a bad character that would deliberately harm anything or anyone it wanted with pleasure. So a really clear effect of the way the language is working on the reader. And then again, the reader, this student reminds the examiner that they are talking about a fearsome creature. The idea of a fearsome creature is continued with the image. So again, that actually was a metaphor, but this student might have been not sure. So we've got an image of a terrible warrior. And that implies, so we've got words like reinforces, implies, suggests. The Tyrannosaurus Rex is a fighter. So a warrior is a fighter, prepared to use its strength to inflict damage on its enemy. So that would be the terrible warrior. The writer further alerts the reader that the dinosaur is a killing machine, using a simile to describe its fence of teeth-like daggers. So again, we've got really relevant details and we've got a really clear point. We've got a clear and accurate use of all of the subject terminology is completely correct. And we've got that effect of that. A dagger conjures up an image of a really sharp knife used by a murderer to kill. So we've got a point here about that word dagger. The fact that this dinosaur has a mouthful of daggers, and here's the effect, makes me feel afraid that anyone coming into contact with the beast would certainly need to be frightened for their lives. A really good, solid grade 4 going into grade 5 response, 5 to 6 marks. Okay, so that concludes our lesson for today on how to approach your answer to the language question. Don't forget also that the same skills also apply to paper 2 question 3, which also asks you to talk about how a writer uses language. And both of the question 4s on paper 1 and on paper 2, you use language and structure terminology to help identify and discuss effects in your responses for those questions, the big mark questions at the end of the reading comprehension section. Okay, I hope you've enjoyed the lesson. Please look back, work on other question 2 pieces, send them in to your teachers for marking, learn your language features. And I'll do another PowerPoint soon with a video cast on language features particularly, just for those of you who are still struggling. Okay, thank you very much for watching. Bye-bye, everyone.